I am on a quest. I want to find out how to make software and hardware perform at their peak. I want to know how to make applications faster, better, and more efficient. And while I'm at it, I want to have a little fun. Don't think I can do it? Just watch me. I'm Scott Moore, and this is the Performance Tour.
Hi, and welcome to the first episode of the Performance Tour 2022. I'm Scott Moore, your host, here in the warm, sunny state of Florida during the winter. You know, for this first outing, let's go back a few months when I made a trip over the summer all the way up to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Now, before I got there, I had to make a pit stop. First stop, Mount Airy, North Carolina. This is a town that has embraced Mayberry, USA, and the home of the Andy Griffith Show. While no filming of the show ever took place there, they do mock this up as if they were the real city. One restaurant that's mentioned on the show that is actually real is the Snappy Lunch.
I'm gonna take Miss Ellie to the picture show Saturday night. You and Miss Rosemary to go with us, and then after the show, we can go down to Snappy Lunch and get something to eat and some coffee.
So of course I had to go check that out and try their famous pork chop sandwich. On the way back, I also made a stop in Tennessee, East Tennessee, in the woods where Joe Colantonio lives. Joe is the host of Test Guild and Perf Guild, quality assurance conferences that many of us look forward to every year and some of us speak at. So I was able to get Joe into the Perfmobile for a nice ride, conversation, and a lunch, by the way. All right, we're in the Perfmobile, and I am with Joe Colantonio of Test Guild, Perf Guild, the famous one. You're everywhere.
I am everywhere. It's awesome to be here. I'm in the James Pulley seat. It's an honor.
The James Pulley seat. Did you hear that? They already associate it with James Pulley. I can't believe that. He's not the only person that gets to ride in the Perfmobile.
Nice.
So what is the latest going on with you, Joe, and especially with Perf Guild? We got another one coming up soon?
So Perf Guild this year, I kind of got sidetracked with other things. So I usually do it every other year. So next year will be the third annual Perf Guild. I'll probably be putting on for sure. I do the Automation Guild every year, but Perf Guild has been pretty much biannually almost.
Well, you hear me saying this all the time, that performance is a niche skill set.
Yes.
And it is.
It is.
Can we expect anybody to know as much as a performance engineer would know about performance? An SRE sounds like a magician to me. They're supposed to know so much, but can they really know as much about performance as a person who does that all the time?
Well, I think what's helpful to model is usually have someone like an architect at a company that is like the automation lead or the performance lead. They know the nitty gritty of it. But I think you can't have them as a roadblock. So they need to distill some of that information to the sprint teams as developing software. And you act like an advocate, not necessarily an expert. Say, okay, here's as much as I know about performance. Let's get this other person involved. Let's get this other team involved. Yeah. They need to know enough, though, to know that it's not rocket science. As long as they're being told certain things to implement in this sprint as part of the checklist, and if they need a deeper dive, just things they need to be concerned about to actually engage the other team members that may be more experts in that area to bring them in during that sprint to help them with that activity.
And see, the issue I have is companies will get that first part, they'll get the individual teams with a certain level of responsibility or ownership of performance, but not full commitment for the end-to-end, and they don't have that other person who can be that mentor or that coach to help. So yeah, that's the part that bothers me. If you have both, then it's the best of both worlds, because I want development teams or scrum teams to be as self-reliant as possible and get the kind of feedback they need. for their level of responsibility.
Exactly.
But we still got to have somebody over here who can get into those nuts and bolts and find those things that might actually create problems when it's all put together and in the right environment. Having a shared set of scripts or business processes in a single place, and they work just as well for performance as they do for functional. Me personally, I don't think that's a reality.
Right.
I think when you have the first part, the functional, and you need to get timings around that, you're answering one question. Does it at least perform well for one in this environment? Does it meet certain service level objectives or whatever? Say it's 5 seconds for a web page, or it's a certain number of milliseconds for a service. As long as you can take that functional script and get that timing from there and know that, and if it's blowing it out of the water, why do a big performance test? Stop it right there. But to then say, well, every time we've created a functional test, all right, we just push a button and now everybody's a performance engineer now, and it doesn't replace that.
No,
and sometimes I think people get confused with that.
I don't know why they would get confused. It's like just a small piece of it, and you're just helping the overall larger picture. I think what's interesting though about the one user is James Pulley says that a lot of people don't even know about the one user performance. They automatically jump to 5 user, 10 user, 1,000 users, and don't even realize, hey, this isn't even performing as a 1 user or a 2 user, and that's critical. It's not the be all end all, but it's contributing along the way, so that in the end, you know how they say you can't build testability at the end of the life cycle, you can't build performance at the end of the life cycle. So you need to start getting that input from the teams, and any way you can engage them, whether it's just adding small high level performance and then getting a more realistic performance team or effort around it, it's going to be critical later on, I think, for sure.
Yeah, I completely agree. And so it's going to be interesting to see how things morph as we continue to get into microservices and building things kind of like Legos. Now we've got to trace the performance on stuff that may not be there 5 minutes from now, right? That's why we have to have this tracing and telemetry, because now we've got containers that exist now. An hour from now, it may be a different container. We still have to know what was performing well, what wasn't. So it's going to be an interesting game to keep monitoring this and keep track of this.
No, it's true. Especially with microservices, you may have a handle on how it performs in isolation, but that could be consumed by multiple different workflows, and that different workflows could affect its performance. So absolutely, tracing comes into play, telemetry. It's going to be a big thing as well, I think. It's another buzzword I've been hearing with observability. Telemetry has been another one.
I think you'll be hearing a lot more about that in the near future.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you, Joe, for being in the Perfmobile today.
Awesome.
And we'll have this out there for everybody to see. But this is a really cool guy. And let me tell you a little bit about Joe. When you are near the Colantonio compound, you should watch out. If you get out of your car, you're going to hear animal sounds. And you never know what that animal's going to be, and you may actually hear banjos playing in the background. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. But no, it's great. Thanks a lot, Joe.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate
it. We'll see you out on the road.
Awesome.
I headed up to Pennsylvania and went to Valley Forge to meet Mark Tomlinson. We wanted to discuss where are we at in late 2021, early 2022 with regards to performance testing and engineering. And here's what Mark had to say.
What's the message that we as performance engineers should be telling everybody that they should be thinking about? Because I've learned some things. I mean, I believe businesses have learned some things from people going and working at home, but what do we come out of this learning?
We learned that the VPN is not all it's cracked up to be.
And
it's a piece of networking gear, and there are people that did software-based VPNs, and they learned pretty quickly, hey, remote infrastructures for remote working, that last mile is the killer. And suddenly you're expensing high-speed internet to every home. Or you're disadvantaging entire parts of your workforce because they can't get online. Or you have international workforce that can't access things at the same time the pandemic and all of this working at home, all of those vulnerabilities. Well, now I'm putting management agents out on would be personal computers. Well, they're still personal computers. They might, or maybe aren't domain joined. So now we got ransomware attacks going off the charts because there's vulnerabilities over there. We can exploit those. And a lot of people are like, well, let's just run VPN in the cloud. And well, how do we run that? With a service? Well, now you start paying for the service, and that's not all it's cracked up to be. I think there's a lot of people that didn't have to think about performance in that remote world, and that was the first wave of the first 6 months of the pandemic from an IT perspective. Now the interesting thing I think that's happening business-wise is business was increasing into 2020 and then drops off. If your business was really affected by that. And then people stopped testing. They stopped a lot of work. They maybe even laid off a bunch of their workforce in the engineering world. Usually not. That's usually the IT staff hung in there because they still needed to set up all these remote offices to be able to do stuff. So when business comes back, it doesn't just come back like if you're on a curve, there's a huge chunk missing. Mm-hmm. Your actual target after a year and a half is higher than when you left.
Right.
And people underestimate that increase in load. So that gap where everything was like, well, we don't have to throw the servers, we don't have to do testing. I mean, even we're not pushing the same volume. This is not as urgent. The risk isn't there. In the last 6 months, as people started, business recovers, whether you're opening up or not, people figured out how to do business in the pandemic. That business is a lot of it's online. It's coming back plus growth.
Right.
Plus you have to then readjust your 2x and 3x goals to stay ahead of capacity and usage. So I think there's still a tremendous learning if you're just someone who's like, here's my requirements, run my load test, and someone else decides what that curve looks like. For a good performance engineer, we analyze every component and figure out, all right, what are we gonna run out of first? And is it something I can throw resources at easily? Or do I have to rebuild an app to be more efficient because there's just not that much CPU or money in the world to in our business to make that go? So I think people are still underestimating what business is gonna come back to by the end of this year.
You think you've had all this time to prepare and you know what you would do in a circumstance like this, but we go back to old solutions instead of the ones that we have heard in the industry that are available to us now. For example, when the PPP program came out, instead of building a site correctly and scalable from the get-go, here's your chance to do that and use code that's been scaled in the past. No, let's just throw another site together and put it the way that we did in 1999.
Yeah.
and they're still going back to the old, I guess, principles or the old processes that they've had. With the state of Florida, when they had a problem with unemployment, first thing they did was get 100 servers in the cloud and add that to that, thinking that was going to solve the problem. It solved it for 5 minutes because it wasn't a server problem, and nobody could tell them otherwise. So instead of what are we looking at that's causing the root of the problem, we have now all of these great tools that inspect every area of the IT, the technology stack. But we still have people that are, I guess, making the decisions, still going back to those old, let's just throw hardware at it. Let's throw together a site quickly because we've got to get out. How do we stop this? Because other than education, I don't know another way to do it. And the problem with that is I always kind of, in the back of my mind, assumed all these people who are doing performance testing in 2010, it's 2021. Those are the same people. No, they've graduated to other positions. They've retired. It's new people, and they don't have that knowledge that the other people, maybe they didn't pass that on.
Yeah.
I don't know how to fix that.
I think there's always good parallels with our brothers and sisters in the non-functional realms of security, where you get an entire organization, a massive corporation, saying, we're going to initiate secure by default, and we're going to start a consortium through the W3C or through IEEE, even some standards body. And this is something that I go back and forth with James a lot, where sometimes we can squelch things by being super standard or making a standard. And the testing world wants to be very free to improvise and be context driven and all of that. But I think there's something to be said for secure by default being a really excellent way to say, hey, stop putting a version of MySQL out there with the default limitation, not licensing wise, just here's your your default is 10 connections to the database. Take the PPP program, where we know they just threw servers at the problem because elasticity solves all ills. And so they threw servers at the problem, actually made it worse.
Right.
Because the database was completely overloaded. Set aside the architectural constraints of, well, what is the known architectural ASP.NET site, fully dynamic site, didn't get the caching right, didn't get the controls right for cache, all the cache pieces in the browser, and then a suboptimal database design. I see the same thing happening with Entity Framework. Entity Framework moves really fast when it comes to development. It'll piss every DBA off because they're like, what the? I get this star schema should help me, but it's not helping, right? It's not built to scale to something the level of the PPP. So I'm wondering if we need sort of just a consortium agreement or drive a federation of performance. Hey, these are secure by default. Well, performant by default. Your defaults are, it's going to scale to some agreed upon number. And then we all agree if you're just the default for MySQL, the default for Apache, the default for number of threads, number of connections, number of sockets, operating system. What's the default? We've made it secure, now let's make it perform. And to some extent, we might lose out on business. We'll start working better. Like there might be not an opportunity to come in and help somebody and, wave the magic wand. This is some black magic wizardry, whatever. Actually, I just changed the number of threads. Well, that's kind of like cheat. Right. That's kind of cheating the system. But eventually you'll find people that are like, well, I didn't know what the defaults were. What am I intending? What are my architectural intentions to build a system that performs? And actually have an intelligent conversation with an executive, with a CMO. Says, oh, why did we build it that way? Because we weren't thinking about being successful.
Yep.
So yeah. Performance by default would be good.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show, and we'll look forward to seeing what's coming out of Perf Bytes real soon.
You betcha. Scott, good luck on the tour. Drive safely, and drive as fast as you can possibly drive.
Legally.
There's several CPUs in your truck, dude. It's a computer with wheels.
So as I've mentioned, I was from Nashville, Tennessee, and stayed there for many years, but in recent years, I've moved to Florida to be closer to family. But this includes extended family as well, and that includes my cousin Bubba.
Yeah, I'm Bubba Moore. I own a local storage facility down here.
Yeah, Bubba Moore, he's an interesting person.
Well, yeah, I have seen UFOs probably twice, but what's that got to do with the interview?
Bubba's wife, Betty, she's also interesting.
Oh yeah, Betty, she's in here in the spray and pray, and between her target practice and her Beanie Baby conventions, she stays pretty busy.
I always used to mention to Bubba all the musicians and famous celebrities that I would see in Nashville all the time. Well, Bubba, he kind of gets excited about where he lives too, and he likes to feature his local celebrities, but it's not the same.
Is James Brown a famous enough name? We got James Brown's famous frame barbecue. Somebody told me James was dead. I just went in there and talked to him. You know what he told me? I feel good. Y'all heard of Neil Young, right? A famous singer-songwriter? Well, he's my mechanic. And who could forget Marky Mark and the Fresh Bunch? Well, we've got Marky Mark right here. We've even got the lost mines of Atlantis here, which means we may have the secret to eternal youth. I bet you ain't got that where you're from. Huh, technology boy.
Bubba also likes to talk technology with me, but also he doesn't really quite get it, I don't think.
I hear Scott talking about technology all the time. It sounds like it could be pretty complicated, but it's really not. What's there to know about Docker? Here's your dock right here. And containers? Well, daggone, that's what we put our worms in, man. Data lakes? Well, we got lots of lakes. We even got a town in Florida called Lakeland. Cloud? I see one right there. Observability. Easy. I have observed several species of fish, bird, and snake in this lake. Open source. Now, if I tell you where I get this from, that's an open source. Anything else is closed source, and that's for me and the revenuers to figure out. For years and years, Scott's talked about how wonderful Mercury products were. Mercury this and Mercury that and the performance. I get it. I used to use Mercury's all the time too. But I prefer Yamahas now because, you know, Mercury's just don't give you any good options anymore. You know what I mean?
So there's my cousin Bubba. That's the episode. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you'll join us for the next episode of the Performance Tour in 2022. I'm Scott Moore, and we'll see you on the road. Cue the airplane overhead.
Yeah, I
That's
planned
the first thing.
Yeah. That's United 674.
Go ahead.